I think a lot of times on this channel, I've spoken about how self awareness can be abused and taking a break from self analysis can actually help propel you forward. But now I want to take a slightly more psychological approach where we may draw lines between our struggles from earlier on in our life, continuing on to where we are now. So I want you to think about what it is that is bothering you now. Very plain and simple, very kind of broad, very general. What is it that's bothering you now? What is it that's occupying your attention? What is it that is withholding you from being satisfied in life? And I'm going to take a different approach to what, you know, many self-help angles like to say. I'm not going to tell you to detach from it. I'm not going to tell you to stop prioritizing it. And actually, what I'm going to say is that there might be a reason. There might be a reason. And let me make a very clear distinction when I say that. When I say there might be a reason for whatever it is you're struggling with now, this is with the exception of, irrational thoughts. Thinking is sort of a weird, sticky territory. And if what is bothering you now is an imaginary danger rather than a complete subject of inadequacy, then I want to make clear that you're not dealing with whatever it is you fear, you're dealing with fear itself. So if when I said, think about what's bothering you, you thought about an imaginary danger or an imaginary fear, I want you to come to the root of the issue. And I want us to come to the root of the issue of every single answer that you might have given, because however many of you are going to listen to this, you're each going to have a slightly different answer, hyper specific to your life. And this feeds exactly into the point that I want to make, whereas I don't want to attribute any outside mysticism that I don't know for sure, but there does seem to be parallels in each person's life that mirror the struggles all the way from when they were very, very young to the things that they experience now. And even if those struggles, fears, anxieties, all these things don't look the same as they did, all those years ago, it still manifests in a very similar form. Some people deal with fear of confrontation. Others deal with being too confrontational, being too angry, being too violent. Some people deal with a lackluster social life. Some people lose themselves in social life, which feeds addiction or any of these other things. And I want you to know, whatever angle you're coming at this episode from, that you are not excluded from this paradigm. What I'm imagining and what I want you to imagine is that you're looking at a piece of paper, and on that piece of paper is a map, a sort of system of your life. And there's lines connecting everywhere, and it's almost hard to understand. But then you see these words that stand out. Maybe it's unworthiness, maybe it's fear, maybe it's anxiety. And then there's these little situations marked all over the area. You know, it's almost as if it's the same energy, the same teacher coming in the form of an emotion looking to teach you something. And I'm not asking you right now to figure out what that teaching may be, because that can be very difficult. And I think a lot of times we get very angry and frustrated, and that's when we know it might be actually time to view ourselves as a system, view our life, view our personality, and see that as awareness. So you are awareness, you are the awareness of your personality, you are the awareness of your thoughts, your emotions, and all these things. As the backdrop awareness, how can we view the paradigm of who we are, every struggle that we've had, everything, and how can we start to connect the dots between all of our struggles? Where are the common themes here? And why is that? And I think it's more important to notice that there is lines connecting to one another rather than fully understand why. And this is where I want to introduce the concept of allowing space. Because I think many of you, as you imagine this concept in your head, and you're thinking about your life, whatever struggle it is you've had, and which way that mirrors other struggles, there might be a feeling of anger. And I don't think that's abnormal at all. There might be a feeling of anger, resentment, frustration, and more than anything, you're not satisfied. And the reason you're not satisfied with life is something you could probably attribute to this system, to this connection of struggles. You still feel as though you have not been given everything you've been wanting. And if I'm not wrong to assume that, I think there's two ways that we can go about this, right? The first thing we need to do is take a couple deep breaths. Whenever we find ourselves spiraling, whenever we start connecting the dots and we start to see that there is a connection in our struggles, there is a connection in our fears and anxieties, these things are not necessarily random or they don't appear random. We need to step back and relax first. We need to approach this with a level head. Because if we lose ourselves in the anger and frustration of it all, we're going to focus more on the feeling rather than being able to see things objectively. There's a time to allow feelings, and there's a time to view the currents of your life in an objective manner so we can actually look at things logically. So, see how whatever affected you as a kid, I'm not talking about a cause and effect. I'm talking about there's a similar concept and theme in your life. And I don't want to get hyper specific because I don't want to take you off the track of whatever you're thinking about in your mind right now. The last thing we want to do when approaching a sort of psychological concept like this, we're trying to tackle something very abstract here, right? It's very psychologically abstract because we all have our very own specific things. And even though we might draw lines, we don't necessarily know why. Maybe it has to do with the dynamic of our parents. Maybe it has to do with our environmental experience when we were kids. I don't think that's necessarily necessary right now to find some sort of relief. And I think that relief is going to come in acknowledging two things can be true. Number one, the pattern exists. We don't know why. And we're going to do things practically to try to make amends of that pattern, to try to break that loop. Number two, in the meantime, we shouldn't give in to intense emotions. We shouldn't start thinking irrationally. We shouldn't start thinking illogically. Come to your center of balance and acknowledge, okay, I am unsatisfied in my life. I can say that sentence without harboring all of the emotions and start jumping to very negative conclusions about myself and about my life. So we need to find a way to let go. In the meantime of progress, we need to find a way to let go. And we don't have to detach from the pattern itself, because if we detach from the acknowledgement of seeing that there is a pattern between all of our struggles in our life, then we're going to silently grow angry, and we don't want that to happen. We don't want that to happen because then we start airing out our frustrations on other people. We have to notice this as well. We start airing out our frustrations on other people. We start not giving certain things a chance. We start blocking ourselves off from other opportunities. And it's because we keep waiting on that one thing that is going to bring us satisfaction in our lives. And we always think as though we're being tricked, we're being punked, we're being teased with it. And you're not wrong to be angry or to be frustrated because life is confusing, and this repeating sense of frustration and anger that you have is a call to action, I think, more than anything else, and it's not to be ignored. These feelings that you have, whatever pattern you keep continuing, whatever loop you feel just keeps repeating and you feel like you've had enough already, it's not about giving up. It's not about detaching from the whole system. You have to dig into why. Why is this formatted in the way that it is? Why have I been in a weird way experiencing the same things for my whole life in different fonts? And now what do I have to do right now to change? How do I change the trajectory? And the answer doesn't have to come to you right now. but how do I change the trajectory of my life so I don't feel like I'm living out some sort of unconscious karmic system? And that's the next point I want to get into. I don't mean karma as in you do something good will happen to you, or vice versa. What I mean by karma is a sort of, when you're born, there is a, for some reason, I don't know why it feels like this, there is a sort of pattern and a system of fears, anxieties, struggles that you are going to go through. And they're all going to be a kind of related. And it is up to you to break free of this emotionally rather than in each individual circumstance. And I can't stress this enough. I know you're tired. I know you're angry. I know you're frustrated, but don't let those emotions and feelings make decisions for you. Wait until you come back to at least a relatively neutral state of mind and then start to make choices and decisions. And it's okay to dive into the deep darkness of whatever those emotions are, because I think we often underestimate how in depth frustration can feel. And frustration is a sign of not misalignment, but turbulence in finding alignment. Misalignment would look drastically different. But if you feel as though, there are things in your life going right, but in one area or another area, whatever it may be, there are things going just extremely unsatisfactory. And then you draw that connection back to your whole life and you see that this feeling that you're feeling now, this anger, frustration, whatever it may be, this fear, you felt it before in many different instances, and it has yielded very little benefit when you actually give into it instead of approaching whatever it is that you're struggling with, with a level head. You have to be willing to investigate the emotional turmoil you're experiencing right now, all the while trusting that future you, who is approaching things from a more level head, can navigate the future more accurately from what you want it to look like. So how do we communicate with our sort of inner child to find the answers? How do we look to them and ask them, you know, what is it that has been connecting this misery? What is the link to this misery? With all misery, there is a link. There is a series of actions, there's a series of belief systems, and there's a series of going about things in a certain way where you believe that you're changing far more than you actually are. Don't jump to conclusions. Don't jump to negative conclusions. Your inner child's not going to talk to you in English. I'm talking about real communication with the inner child, and that is thinking back to your child self. What fears, what anxieties, what troubles, what was going on back then? And without diving too deep into that, think of you now. Think of yourself, the actual self that you inhabit right now, like looking in a mirror. What are you dealing with now? How similar, though, are those two? Not at a face value, but emotionally. How similar are those things? And even you might even describe the emotions as different things. When you were a child, you might have dealt with a lot of anxiety. And now as a adult, maybe you deal with a lot of anger per se. They could both be anxiety, they could both be fear, they could be completely correlated. But notice how there is a link if you observe it enough. I know it can feel like the universe is mocking you, teasing you, getting you ever so close, and then sending you back to that emotional state that you've been resenting for so long. But I don't think that is the case. I don't think we're being teased. I don't think we're being tempted. What I think is actually happening is we are being shown a very particular block, a very particular limitation that is in desperate need of destruction. And oftentimes, it isn't going to be an emergency. It's not going to be a panic that is really going to be our downfall, but rather that slow burn of not breaking out of our shell that's really going to take a toll on us. And I think we're being shown to look at things not rashly. Don't look at things with so much emotion, even if you feel very strongly. Even if the world and every situation that you're experiencing feels like it's pulling on those heartstrings of yours, trying to, you know, have a go at you, or trying to not give you what you want in some way. See how we can still attribute the results of our life probably to a lack of action, to a lack of opportunity. And how much attention are we giving to those same fears, to those same anxieties? How much of it are we giving? How much power of our life are we giving to these things that we've been struggling with? How much of a deciding factor in everything we do are these things? I don't think it's about overcoming the emotion. It's about waking up to the realization that you actually have a choice, and that everything in your life from beginning to now has been placed in a way to wake you up. So as you see the pattern, as you see the similarities between child you and you now, as you see the same fears, the same struggles, the same anxieties, the same difficulties, the same inner difficulties, it seems as though the message has always been initiative. You can't wait for the unconscious unfolding to occur, because that's going to take you down the route of that which you are dreading. But to unmistakably not cross that road, we can be a completely different version of ourselves and enter a sort of timeline where those limitations do not exist. And maybe, just maybe, the universe, reality, is showing us that that's the only way out. The only way out is being a different version of us. And that you can't bring all this baggage with you. You can't. In a way, we feel for our inner child, and when we carry around our inner child with our fears and anxieties, because in a weird way, we are attached to those fears and anxieties because it shows us who we are, and it's all we know. These struggles are all we know. These lines that we've connected from beginning to end are all we know. And so we cling to them because they are familiar. But it is because they are familiar that we are trapped. And this whole time, we've been thinking that we've been growing, but we've been growing within the bounds of the same limitations that were assigned to us from the very minute we came into existence. And I mean that metaphorically and possibly literally, whereas the unconscious, quote unquote, karmic system is set up for us. So ponder that the only way out is to be different, different than you ever could have imagined. Not a different person, a different version of you, one that doesn't play small, one that doesn't cling, one that doesn't try to control, whatever it may be. Only when we act in the opposite accordance do we get a different result. That's it for today's video, guys. I know it was a little bit all over the place. I was trying to kind of, make words of a relatively abstract concept. So I hope you guys kind of understand where I was going with it a little bit. But other than that, I'm going to leave the link to my book in the description. So if you want to check that out, you can. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you're listening on Spotify, thank you as always. I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.